Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo, along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. There's a lot to get to, but first, General, we're going to focus on what happened in the city of Woonsocket on Tuesday night. A massive mill fire just completely destroyed that whole building. Mutual aid was brought in, and that's kind of the thing we're going to focus on today. Let's first talk about the fire itself. It was a general alarm fire. That means every available firefighter in Woonsocket has to come in.
That's correct. And in this particular case, it was an 8-alarm fire, meaning that they issue out requirements for more firefighters to come in from different surrounding communities. Basically, many of our cities and towns subscribe to a compact called mutual assistance. And when you have something that goes well beyond the capability of that particular town or municipality, they look to other towns and cities to come in and pick up the slack. In this particular case, you have a fire that was so far-reaching, it did obviously exceed the capability of Woonsocket. Not so much as and there are two issues that you talk about: the size of the fire and the duration of the fire. You know, when you have a large fire and you can put it down pretty quick, then you maybe would look to something less than looking at a large mutual aid scenario. But the duration, you know, you can't keep firefighters out there for hour after hour after hour, because certainly you'll have an accident, and that's certainly something you don't want to see. So the duration and the kind of fire you have will drive what they look for as far as assistance is concerned.
And you're talking about one of the first communities to show up was Millville, Massachusetts, and that is really close to the Massachusetts border. It's only about 2 miles, the Fairmount area of Woonsocket. So they were the first on the scene. So they were replaced after about an hour because of the intensity of the heat last night.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the having to be in a near proximity to the fire itself to prevent the fire from going on to other infrastructure in the area, you have to be pretty close. And in addition to the some 60 pounds of equipment on your back and breathing through apparatus and the heat itself, you know, that's a big demand. So you talk maybe, you know, 20 minutes to a half hour, you're really pushing it. So when you get into the hour, several hours, then you really well exceed the capability of any firefighter.
Well, the building was about 122 years old. American Wood Pellet bought it. The company who was there moved to Cumberland in 2009. But the danger really is not just the fire, but the wood and the chemicals that were soaked into that wood over 122 years.
Exactly. Back in the turn of the century, the last century, much of the equipment and the oil and all of the other chemicals were just allowed to soak into the wood, and consequently that is the basic hazard of any mill fire, because that timber has been around for hundreds of years, if not a little bit less than that. But certainly when you start a fire, you look at all the toxins that come out of that, and you look at the oil that will just continue to feed itself, and the only thing you can do is to allow it to burn itself out and prevent it from spreading to other structures around the fire site itself.
Well, this past winter, a Seville dye caught on fire in Woonsocket. A couple of months later, they deemed that was arson. The State Fire Marshal's office doesn't believe that's the case in this fire, although the investigation is continuing. They believe that a construction worker left some type of blowtorch behind, and that somehow sparked the fire for last night. But it goes to show you just one little thing and what they could do. You
know, it's amazing when you hear this. In a matter of several hours, in this particular case, they've come up with at least a probability. When you look at how can you possibly come up with what caused it, when you look at that kind of a fire and everything's caved into itself, I take my hat off to the investigators that go into these kinds of fires and come up with at least a probability as to what happened, and certainly the firefighters themselves, tremendous people.
General, we hear so much about when we hear mutual aid, mutual assistance, but I think some people don't realize that the city of Woonsocket has to pay Millville, Blackstone, Bellingham, even East Providence. They were there too. They're going to have to pay that out.
That's my understanding. In some cases, you have some built-in capability for the town and city that's responding to mutual assistance, but at the same time, eventually a bill will be produced to go back to the city that was calling in for that assistance. Similar to what we have with when you call in other police officers and other outside agencies, somebody pays the bill, and usually it's the municipality that calls in for that help.
You know, the debate is going to be this ladder truck in Woonsocket. It was taken out of service by the mayor several months ago. It was just down the street from where this mill fire took place. They had to obviously bring another ladder in from another community. The argument is, well, we'd have to pay them, but it is a lot cheaper than keeping 3 guys on the job and that ladder in operation.
Exactly. For a one time, on occasion, it certainly is a major consideration as far as finances are concerned. To keep that ladder in service year-round, along with the personnel and overtime and so on and so forth. And I don't mean to demean the purpose of having the mutual aid in existence, but it certainly helps the budget in reference to calling it in on occasion and not have it sit there and have to pay for it day after day.
Fire like this, what does this do for public safety? You know, they had to water down the buildings around it. I think 3 structures did suffer some damage. But public safety in the city of Woonsocket, when you have everybody in one scene and you already have mutual aid in at that particular location.
Exactly. You know, what you do is you diminish the capability of the rest of the city. Not only the firefighters, but you have police they're monitoring traffic and certainly controlling traffic. You have EMS personnel. You have other entities that go well beyond just the firefighter itself and the police and the fire department itself. So the overall response to a major fire like this touches not only the firefighters but the police, EMS, and so on and so on.
What kind of training do these guys have to go through with something like that?
Huge, you know, and I think sometimes we don't pay attention as a society, knowing what is required of these firefighters. Sometimes we look at it saying, well, an occasional fire comes about and they'll respond to it and they'll do well, but it's not that easy. You know, you need to be physically capable of doing it. You need to be trained. You need to understand that you're putting yourself in harm's way. And as an example, last night a wall fell on one of the firefighters. Unfortunately, you know, he wasn't hurt badly. He did end up in the hospital. But those are the kinds of things that you need to be prepared for. And certainly when you talk about physical capability and training, that's all part of it.
You got to believe that this is probably going to come up in the city of Providence. 73 or about 73 officers getting pink slips. The fire department is also looking at ways to cut the budget. You know, what can they stand on at this point, looking at this situation?
You know, they need to come to the table again. They had the opportunity, but I think what they're talking about right now is in order to maintain the numbers in Providence, everybody has to take a cut in pay. That's my understanding.
Or they get laid off.
Or they get laid off, one or the other. Now, it would seem to me, and I'm only speaking as a layman in this particular case, if someone come to me and said, look, you know, we have to lay you off, or we can give you a reduction in pay, but you'll still have your job, you'll still have your health benefits, I would probably opt for the secondary or the latter versus say, okay, lay me off kind of stuff.
But they don't want to go back 10 years after they've worked so much.
Well, I agree, but you know, when you put in one hand, you got a job, less pay, no job. Even though you have to make a retrograde, that's a tough decision, and I really feel for anyone that has to make that decision. But if you really draw it and make a parallel to private industry, that's exactly what happens. You lose the job, you lose any coverage whatsoever, versus the public sector, which means that they have some options. That's to take a pay cut and still have a job.
Okay, we're going to move on. By the way, the building in Woonsocket was insured for $5 million. American Wood Pellet did invest in that, and they believe that it still won't hurt the local economy. It's just going to delay what they were going to do with that. So that is the good news. Let's move on to the...
Just one thing on that factory, however. Ironically, the 6th of June was D-Day. That factory made these fake tanks that was part of General Patton's army in the very beginning to have a guise, if you will, to suggest we had a lot more equipment than we did.
I think that was part of the whole historical thing, too, not that it was just 122 years old, but something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So. Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the major heat that is coming our way on Thursday. Tony's been talking about it, anywhere between 95 and 100 degrees, and that always poses a threat to
Absolutely.
the public safety.
Public safety, no matter how you cut it, whether you're dealing with a hurricane, a blizzard, a snowstorm, a thunderstorm, anything that disrupts the normal flow of power, perhaps, water supply, anything in reference to our elderly that are subjected to not having their medication on time. Somebody has to pay attention to that. So when you have a severe thunderstorm, as perhaps we could look to tomorrow, You always consider that public safety is the issue. EMA has a job to do, and that's to coordinate, making sure that resources are in place to be able to deal with the consequences. If not during the event, you certainly will deal with the consequences afterwards. So public safety is an issue regardless of whether you have a thunderstorm or a hurricane.
Are they dealing with this a couple of days before, or is it just a plan that's always put into place?
You know, in Rhode Island we have what's referred to as an all hazards plan, regardless of whether you're looking at a blizzard or a hurricane or a severe thunderstorm. All the consequences and preparation are basically the same because you're dealing with EMS personnel, communications, police, and fire.
Getting close, and finally changing topics, we're getting close to the troop withdrawal. Are we seeing some sidestepping going on
Yeah,
here?
I think so. At least as I see it, Panetta, the incoming chief of the Secretary of Defense position, sidestepped a question that was asked of him yesterday about the withdrawal and the timing of it and numbers. Didn't want to answer that. So I'm not sure whether he has a complete understanding of what Obama is looking to. Gates, on the
How
other
would he
hand,
not have that, knowing he's just getting this job?
well, I don't know. You know, you can always have your opinion, but he may have had this conversation before he was even appointed. What you see on the surface isn't normally, all the time anyway, what's really taking place underneath. And so, at the same time, Gates made a statement yesterday about we are about to give a decisive blow to the Taliban. You can't have both. Either you have a withdrawal or you bring in additional troops to do this significant blow to the Taliban.
Is Gates possibly saying that to keep those troops there?
I don't know. I think that's a possibility. I think when you have one side looking at the opposite side of withdrawal, and you have one endorsing withdrawal, somewhere in between we'll find the truth to be, I think we're going to see not a large withdrawal. I think you're going to see a significant offensive over the next several weeks.
Well, we saw 5 people die in Iraq, soldiers die in Iraq this week. I think we're up to 4460 now.
Correct.
For the total so far in Afghanistan. It's obviously more than that. General Centracchio, thank you for your time.
Good to be here.
Thanks for watching.